Hey everyone, how's it going? Thanks so much for tuning in. Today's video is a special one to say the least. The final in-depth review of our 1962 GMC C1000 Restomod project. This truck is the culmination of about 2.5 years of off and on work. It has been an incredible amount of work to say the least. I'm so proud of how it came out, and I'm so excited to be finally bringing this video to you guys. If you guys want to see this truck in its earlier stages, I've got the playlist to it down in the description box below. Everything from the original teardown to the fabricating, original start of bodywork, and so on and so forth. This project got way out of hand really fast, and there was a bunch of unforeseen circumstances that I had to work my way through. So between that and having other projects and just juggling life in general, I just physically could not continue filming this series. I had to work on this truck in every little bits of free time that I had to try to just get it to completion so I can move on past the project and get back to focusing on, let's call them the legacy projects on the channel at this point, like the 89 Nissan 240SX, which is very close to completion, and of course the other projects that you long-term subscribers are probably well aware of. So anyway, this truck turned out so good. Before I get started, I want to give a quick shout out to the brands that have supported this project through this process. First off, a big thanks and shout out to GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco. My relationship with them is what started this series. Basically, we set out to create a Restomod using as many factory available parts as possible, and while it was a complicated build and it took a lot longer than I wished it would, the results speak for themselves. Also, a special shout out to Second Skin Auto and Home Insulation, Vintage Air, Detroit Steel Wheels, Holly Performance Products, Boss Audio Systems, Klingspor, Deechworks, Jet Hot, O'Reilly Auto Parts, and Steel Rubber. As always, there's a whole lot of stuff to cover, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start her up and let her run. I already knew this video was going to be long, so buckle up. I have a lot to talk about because this is without a doubt the most proud I've been about a completed project up to this point. There's so much that's gone into this build that I will undoubtedly miss something, but I'll try my best to cover the truck in its entirety. As a classic car and truck enthusiast, I appreciate pretty much everything because each vehicle has a story to tell. Whether it be a story about preservation or a story about giving something a new lease on life. The story of this truck is the latter. We bought it originally over 2.5 years ago as something that I can do some quick content on, flip, and move on to something else. Where I am with this truck today could not be further from that original goal. You never know what God's plans are for you. The people He'll put in your path, even only for a short period of time, and the lessons you'll learn along the way. It has been a whirlwind of an experience, being a combination of emotional and physical trials to great victories and significant gains in knowledge and confidence that will only help me as I further explore my automotive passions. After the initial plans with this truck fell apart, it sat idle, partially torn down for a while until I had the chance to work with GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco on a possible YouTube series. The only idea I had available at the time was doing something with this GMC, only it had to feature their parts, which, let's be honest, there aren't many factory parts available for a 62 model. As the revered Jeremy Clarkson would say, I got a brainwave. I had access to a 74 C10 short bed that had a mint frame and a body that was rotten beyond belief. Even though the 62 was originally a long bed, I got the idea to combine the two trucks, to create a Restomod using as many factory parts as possible. One that's easy to live with, easy to service, affordable to fix, and one that can be worked on anywhere without a wild array of specialty equipment. During this time, my wife and I came across a wrecked 04 Escalade that was mangled beyond repair but ran and yard drove. Long story short, the goal was to take a couple of rough trucks and a newer SUV that were all destined for the scrapyard in their current state, tear them down, combine the best aspects of each and build a Restomod using the body of the 62. Getting everything torn down and mocked up was honestly the easy part, followed by months of fabrication, months of bodywork, and even longer for paint. Don't even get me started on assembly time, because at that point, the truck was a jigsaw puzzle. There were almost as many successes as there were setbacks. I almost gave up multiple times, but I thank God for my friend Andy jumping into the ring mid-build to help me make it through the most challenging build I've ever tackled. One of the many tricky parts to this build were all of the GMC specific parts, which there isn't much support for, unlike the Chevrolet C10. They're basically the same trucks, but the GMC just has a few little unique nuances. The only reproduction pieces I was able to get GMC specific was the tailgate and door sill plates. Everything else was either custom made or custom fabricated. GMC specific bits include the grille, the front section of the hood, the dashboard, tailgate, and door sill plates. Another big issue with these trucks is rust, and they seemingly like to rust from the inside out, as we discovered when cutting into everything originally. Of course, in doing things the right way, everything was cut out, sectioned, and replaced, including the inner and outer rockers, portions of the floor pan, cab corners, lower doors, and the hood. The hood in particular, with the unique GMC front portion, had to be hand fabricated because there is not a reproduction piece currently made. Originally, the front section was a separate piece. The hood itself is shared with the C10. You can buy the C10 front section, just not the GMC section. Therefore, in the process of cutting out the rust and fabricating new sections, the front panel was welded to the hood and the bodywork was done for a seamless transition, something that you don't normally see on these trucks. It's incredibly sleek in person. My wife designed the color theme, a combination of GM's son of a gun gray metallic and silver ice metallic. Numerous color accents on the hood, grille, tailgate, roof, and striping give even more detail to the truck. The gray in particular changes color a bit depending on the light and angle. It sometimes looks black, sometimes looks green. It's a deep and vibrant metallic gray. My buddy Andy painted the truck, and our friends over at Klingspor kept him supplied with all of the sanding, buffing, and finishing products needed to get the paint looking like a mirror. The single side view mirror on the driver's door was how the truck was originally, so we kept with that theme. The outward visibility is already really good. The passenger mirror is kind of pointless unless you have a passenger who can be a second set of eyes. Since the outside of the truck kind of speaks for itself, let's dive into the chassis stuff, because that's where things really start to get interesting. The wheels we chose for this build came from Detroit Steel Wheels. They're 22 by 9 inches all the way around and are wrapped in 275/40 Goodyear Eagle Touring all-season tires. This setup ended up being pretty much spot on for what I was originally envisioning. Classic looks, but a more modern package for better handling. We had the wheels powder coated to match the body color and finished them off with a set of baby moon center caps to hide the lug nuts. The caps install with clips that screw into existing tapped holes in the wheels. Detroit Steel offers all sorts of different sizing and ways to outfit and customize your particular setup. The width of the wheels also helped tremendously with giving the truck a planted feeling on the road that doesn't feel that far off from a more modern sport truck. Now that we're getting into the chassis details, keep in mind that everything I'll be discussing is basically square body C10 stuff. Specifically, the chassis is from a 1974 model, but it features numerous upgrades, while keeping true to using as many factory parts as possible. Every single aspect of the chassis has been restored to perfection, including all bushings, ball joints, and rubber components. This was honestly the biggest hurdle in building this truck. The 62's original frame design was much different. 63's updated the front suspension design to incorporate double A-arms and coil springs rather than the 62's torsion bar design. The frame section where the cab mounted did not upturn until it got to the bed. The 67 through 72 frame design is an easier frame to swap over with the earlier body, as the dimensions are closer to what the 60 through 66 frames were. The 73 and newer square body frame design, with the shape being so different, requires a lot of creativity. Rather than going through all of the options, I elected to position the rear of the cab on the frame and use a combination of the 62's and 74's cab mounts to secure the cab to the frame. Lots and lots of trial and error. Doing it this way gives the 62 cab a body lift, if that makes sense. One way to mitigate this is to notch the back of the cab so it sits more over the frame. I elected to go the lowering route for a simpler solution. Once I had the cab where I wanted it, I built everything else accordingly. The core support mounts were borrowed from the 62's frame, but modified. The front frame horns are custom in order to mount the bumper in the right spot. I had to hand make all of the bed mounts. Making sure everything was lined up and gapped appropriately was a huge undertaking, but it turned out incredible. I made the outriggers to support the full weight of the side steps. I also made the outriggers to mount the rear bumper. The front bumper outriggers are from the 74's frame, with the driver's side one being modified to accommodate the steering gearbox. Additional things I added included a boxed front frame brace and a gusseted X-brace over the rear axle. I would argue that this frame is far stronger now than it was back in 1974. Plus, it opened the doors for factory and aftermarket replacement parts that are still very easy to find. Not to mention the possibility for aftermarket performance and chassis parts, since everything underpinning the truck is square body Chevy. The massive girder beam independent front suspension puts coil springs at each wheel, along with a double A-arm suspension member and separate shock absorbers. The design was supposedly to help absorb road unevenness in order to give the truck and its cargo a smooth and quiet ride. I installed lowering springs and drop spindles to give the truck the ride height I was looking for. So I could still use factory style shocks. I welded on a shock relocation perch at the top of the frame rail. The only thing missing is a sway bar, which was not on this frame originally. The truck corner's surprisingly flat as it is, so it's not something I felt it needed, but it can always be added later via aftermarket. The two-stage multi-leaf rear springs were designed to provide firm, steady support whether the truck was empty or loaded. The spring eyes and shackles are rubber bushed to reduce noise and ride harshness. Auxiliary rear springs were available on some models to support heavier loads when needed. Of course, in building this truck, the rear suspension was lowered accordingly using a flip kit to achieve the right height while retaining the factory springs. The rear shocks are positioned with one slanting forward and the other rearward to reduce brake and power hop. I added AC Delco adjustable air shocks in the rear to ensure sufficient clearance between the wheels and rear fenders, plus they can come in handy if the truck ever carries something substantial. They're easily adjustable by a little Schrader valve on the rearmost frame member. Similar to how I did with the front shocks, the rear shocks also have some relocation brackets on the underside of the rear axle. That way I can use factory-sized AC Delco shocks and not have to go to some kind of custom shock setup. The brakes are somewhat of a custom setup though. Depending on the year and trim, you can opt for a heavy-duty brake setup, which included thicker front discs and larger rear drums. This chassis had the standard brake setup, so I elected to do an upgrade to the larger front discs. The rears are more involved, so I let that go as most of the braking is done by the front anyway. The front discs I used are nearly 12 inches in diameter and are internally ventilated. They're clamped down by large single-piston calipers. The cast iron steel rear brake drums are finned for better cooling. The outer edges are also curved to help keep contaminants from the linings. They're 11 inches in diameter and are 2 inches thick. The parking brake is still mechanical, but it's a hybrid of 62 and 74 parts. I was able to combine the two in a custom configuration that allowed me to still use the 62's original parking brake lever, which is this super cool large pull lever underneath the dash. While everything pertaining to the brakes is square body Chevy, the power assistance provided is in the form of Hydro Boost, which came from the same Escalade as the powertrain. Using a 74 style master cylinder, I had to shim it out a bit to give proper pushrod clearance. Other than that small mod, the setup works beautifully. Pedal response is excellent. The brakes bite quick and the truck stops quickly while remaining stable. I really didn't have room for a vacuum booster, so the Hydro Boost was an excellent option. I'll talk about the pedal setup and fab work required to mount everything in just a moment. When it comes to steering, I'm using a new replacement of the original 74 power steering gearbox. It's not a particularly sporty setup, with a 16:1 ratio that takes about 4 turns to go from lock to lock, but it's smooth and comfortable to steer. The 62 had manual steering to begin with, so it's a massive upgrade to say the least. I was able to plumb everything up using 2 of the Escalade's power steering lines, modified slightly with a different fitting on the gearbox side, plus a couple of custom return lines. I also added a power steering cooler to make sure temperatures stay in check, especially with having the Hydro Boost system. The steering column is a Flaming River unit, which bolted right into the truck and adapted to the steering gearbox with a special U-joint. Using a factory steering wheel was a must for me, but I didn't realize till much later on that the column wasn't designed to use a factory wheel, so I made it work regardless. I had to build my own hybrid of a turn signal canceller so it works like it's supposed to when you turn side to side. The only thing I couldn't make work in doing this was the horn, like using the factory horn button, so I just put a custom button within reach underneath the dash. The column is adjustable for tilt, which is nice and is more or less a GM type design, with the turn signal lever on the left and the hazard switch on the right. The thin-rimmed steering wheel is very large in diameter and it's ribbed all the way around so you can get extra grip. The large diameter, with the 62 not having power steering, helped give you extra leverage to make steering easier, especially at lower speeds. With power steering, it doesn't feel overly sensitive or anything like that. It feels very natural. You know, it's old school. Some people prefer a smaller wheel, but I just like the look of the original wheel. Plus, my buddy Andy did some custom paint work on the horn button and the steering wheel itself to carry on the truck's two-tone theme in a very, very cool way. These trucks were offered with 2 bed styles, wide side and fender side. Each bed style was also offered in 3 different lengths, 6.5 foot, 8 foot, or 9 foot. The latter was only offered on the 2500 model trucks. For the fender side in particular, one way to easily identify bed lengths is to look at the side steps. That's where the added length was added, so just imagine a 9-foot bed with a massive side step. Interesting looking, I'm sure. This truck, being an 8-footer originally, required a short bed to use the shorter C10 frame. And it also worked out because the original bed was absolutely rotten and not even usable. I bought all of the parts to build a brand new bed from scratch. Chain and hook latches permit quick, easy opening and closing of the fender side tailgates. Adjustable anchor bolt latches hold the wide side tailgates securely closed and prevent rattles. Both type latches featured extra strong chains for safely supporting overhanging loads when the tailgates are down. I find it especially cool that the fender side chains not only hold the tailgate in place, but they also hold it flat when you lower it. All of GMC's pickup bodies were designed to be strong and extra durable. When it comes to the bed, all of the top edges were rolled for easier, safer loading and extra rigidity. A 16-gauge steel tailgate was used for maximum strength. When lowered, the tailgate is flush with the floor for more convenient loading. Pockets on top of the bed sides can be used for removable stakes for hauling of livestock and bulky, awkward loads. The wide side bodies were double-walled to provide greater strength and rigidity and to protect exterior panels. Of course, the fender side bodies feature side steps for easy curb loading and tie-downs. Both the wide side and fender side bodies featured thick, hardwood floors, which offered several key advantages over a steel bed. It was long-lasting, cost less to maintain, and doesn't rust or bend. It was quiet and didn't exhibit floor drumming on rough roads. It was also claimed to be safer, less chance of slipping in wet weather, making it ideal for livestock and helping mitigate cargo shifting. Lastly, the wood floor was easy to load because of the heavy steel skid strips which rise just above the bed floor. Obviously, you don't have to worry about rust, but wood does rot over time. To give this new white oak wood lasting protection, we completely clear coated them, which gave them a brilliant look and still allowed the grain to pop through. The polished stainless steel bed strips are more dress up than anything. You could also get them in raw steel to paint them to match the truck. With the fender side, you don't have the contoured wheel houses like you would in a wide side. As far as dimensions, the bed length measures 78 inches. While overall length to the edge of the tailgate when folded down is 97.75 inches. Bed width is 50 inches and bed height is 17.5 inches. With this particular truck, the liftover height between the ground and the tailgate edge is 30.5 inches. It almost can't get any easier opening the hood of this truck. There's only one latch and it's located in the right side hood opening. It's just a lever to pull. Once released, the assist springs help lifting and lowering quite a bit. It's an incredibly heavy hood that took 3 of us to install and align. Along with the custom details we did to the hood, I also added insulation underneath that's concealed by form-fitting plastic panels. This truck was originally powered by a 305 cubic inch D-Series GMC V6 engine that developed 142 net horsepower at 3,800 RPM and 260 net pound-feet of torque at 1,600 RPM. It was a low-stress, heavy-duty workhorse of an engine that came standard with a 3-speed steering column-mounted manual transmission. A 4-speed floor-shifted manual transmission was optional, as was 4-speed hydromatic drive. When we first bought this truck, it still had its original powertrain that honestly ran pretty good and yard drove okay. It needed rewiring in a really major way, so we never test drove it on the road. The biggest downside with the original engine, as cool as it was, is that it's very hard to find parts for them now. Internal parts are scarce and could make an engine overhaul a difficult task nowadays. In planning out this series, we wanted to do something that was more enjoyable and reliable and could be easily serviced. In comes this 5.3-liter LM7 V8. It's an LS-based iron block truck motor that I pulled from that wrecked 2004 two-wheel drive Escalade. The engine in its stock form made 295 net horsepower at 5,200 RPM and 330 net pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. So already a significant upgrade. In one part of the series, I stripped the engine down to the short block for a comprehensive refresh with AC Delco and GM genuine parts. The engine, despite having 180,000 miles on it, looked perfect, held like new oil pressure, and didn't burn a thing. Once inside, the cylinders had perfect cross-hatching, nothing was burnt, no sludge or debris of any kind. These engines, especially when cared for, are incredibly durable. After a thorough examining, I did a valve job, installed all new gaskets, oil pump, sensors, accessories, and upgraded some stuff too. The original V6 was painted red, so I carried that over to this engine as a way to pay homage to the original setup. The biggest upgrade I did to the engine was a Texas Speed Stage 2 cam kit. It's designed to use factory GM LS6 single beehive valve springs and factory push rods, making it a super affordable option to spice things up and still have a relatively smooth idle. You also don't need to do any transmission or torque converter modifications. At the crank, it's supposed to generate upwards of 52 horsepower and 23 pound-feet of torque with a 1,200 to 5,800 RPM power band. I had a factory ECM custom tuned so everything syncs together like factory and runs like a scalded dog. After sourcing a set of hooker swap manifolds that I had coated by Jet Hot, I got enough stuff from O'Reilly Auto Parts to build a homemade exhaust with a set of thrush glass packs that exits underneath the side steps. The side pipes look wicked in my opinion and really scream. It's the perfect mix of new and old school. The transmission, which I also used from the Escalade, is a 4L60E 4-speed automatic that's also been tuned to deliver firmer, more positive shifts than a factory setup. It's routed through a traditional steering column shifter. The pedals I used were from an early 2000s Silverado with a drive-by cable setup, slightly modified of course. The firewall mounting plate I used from the Escalade, but it was heavily modified to fit the GMC's dash, accommodate the American Autowire fuse box, and locate the pedals where they needed to be. The throttle cable itself is from an early 2000s Tahoe. With having the upgraded radio in the dash, I also installed a backup camera for added peace of mind. Power is sent to the rear wheels through a custom shortened and rebuilt C10 drive shaft to the C10's original rear end. It's an open differential with 3.08 gearing and semi-floating axles. A good setup for cruising and highway use. When it comes to fueling, the engine features sequential multi-port injection and features a 9.5:1 compression ratio. It's a completely factory-style injection system, but everything from the plumbing back to the tank is custom, supplied to us by Deechworks. They offer everything you need to build a high-end custom fuel system, from lines, fittings, fuel pumps, filters, and more. Specifically, I went with braided PTFE hose, AN fittings, and dual fuel filters, including one from Deechworks and another from a C5 Corvette that incorporates a fuel pressure regulator. Originally, this truck's fuel tank was located behind the seat in the cab, which I always thought was a nutty design. We ditched that in favor of a custom underbed tank with the fuel filler cut offset into the bed floor. It's safer and a much cleaner looking setup overall. In the Escalade, the engine was rated between 14 miles per gallon in the city and 18 miles per gallon on the highway on regular 87 octane. I have no clue what it is now as I've never measured it, but it's also tuned on 93 octane. I can say while it's not fantastic, it sure brings a lot of smiles per gallon from me and passerbys alike. The engine bay of this truck is almost completely custom and blacked out for a stealthier look, allowing the engine to be the centerpiece. The firewall itself received a ton of metalwork, which involved welding up all of the unnecessary holes, bringing the center recess forward a few inches, and welding in a section of firewall from the Escalade to properly mount the Hydro Boost system. Due to the size of the Hydro Boost unit itself, the driver's inner fender had to be modified so it could fit, which turned out awesome. The brake lines are for a square body C10 and didn't line up as well as I would have hoped, but they work great and don't leak, so I'll take the win for being able to make them work. Next time for something custom like this, I'll probably just make my own brake lines versus a prefab setup. It'll just be easier. The best part of how everything is configured here is how easy it is to reach and access all areas of the engine. Serviceability was key in building this truck. A beefy aluminum radiator and large single electric fan keep temperatures well within normal range. I added a fluid cooler down below for the power steering fluid, which was necessary with having the Hydro Boost set up for the brakes. The transmission cooler is built into the radiator. Aside from all of the additional stuff for the vintage air system, I built a custom intake, put in a heck of a good AGM battery, and did some custom routing of other things to make sure stuff was as clean and tucked as possible. I'm so proud of how this turned out. It's so clean you can eat off of it. The interior is one of my favorite parts of this truck for the simple fact that I was able to successfully pull off what, in my opinion, is the best of both worlds. Having the cool looks of a classic truck with just the right amount of modern conveniences. Originally, this was as basic gets. Aside from all of the sketchy wiring and layers of horrible paint, it was intact, but it all had to go. Fun fact, the wraparound windshield, which a lot of folks refer to as knee knockers, were ditched in 1964. I love the visibility of this glass. You can see everything. These trucks were basic, they had no frills, and were not built for comfort, so I wanted to change that at least as much as I felt I could. I started with a completely stripped out cabin. Once all of the rust repair was finished, and significantly layered the bottom half of the cab beneath the greenhouse in Second Skin Spectrum liquid sound deadener, which works to insulate against heat, noise, and vibrations. I did the same thing inside the doors. I also lined the firewall in their Heatwave Pro to further insulate against heat so the AC system can perform at its best. The carpet kit I ordered online and came with mass backing and jute material for even more insulation. I was able to find the reproduction GMC polished step plates, which were a nice touch, and I also added a little chrome detailing on the carpet under the seat. The kick panels were done by a local company, Scarlett's Auto Interior. The right kick panel houses the PCM and the fuse relay block for the PSI standalone powertrain harness. Scarlett's also built a new back wall covering to hide the Second Skin melamine foam that I put back there, and also made some corner closeout pieces that incorporate a couple of speakers down below. There wasn't much I could do about the roof, being that there wasn't any kind of insulation originally. Nonetheless, it gave a nice opportunity to paint the roof to match the outside silver, and it turned out incredible. These trucks were offered with a full-width rear window, but this one has the standard window, which honestly provides good rearward vision. The two-tone paint theme with all of the two-tone accents carries on into the interior as well. By moving the firewall forward 3 inches, as I mentioned before, we were able to make the middle area of the truck even more accommodating, especially with all of the stuff that's now crammed underneath the dash. I'm especially fond of all of the steering wheel details. All of the interior lighting, including under dash and overhead lighting, are LED and super bright at night. Staying true to originality, I left the manual crank windows because they're simple and easy to use. The vent windows are another neat detail that used to be commonplace back in the day. All of the glass trim, and weather stripping has been replaced with all new components from steel rubber. They're local to us and make incredibly high quality gaskets, especially for our wraparound windshield. I also added additional foam weather stripping where applicable to further reduce wind noise and make for a quieter cabin despite having the side pipes. I also installed all new inner door workings such as the latches, locks, and regulators for smooth operation. I rewired the entire truck with one of American Autowire's classic update kits for a C10. What's nice about their kits is that they use modern fuse panels and accommodate for modern accessories if you want to add features now or later on. The new TMI bench seat we got is a monumental upgrade over the original bench. Not only is this one adjustable fore and aft, but the backrest can be reclined. Now, this is not a large cabin, so adjustments are a bit limited if you're tall, but it's certainly better than nothing. Not having the fuel tank behind the seat definitely helped gain a bit more room. The seats are very comfortable. While seat belts were not fitted to this truck originally, that was a must, so I put in a set of retractable lap belts with an auto lock feature. The middle of the dashboard is completely custom, with the Boss Audio double-din touchscreen being the centerpiece. It's hooked up to a factory-style antenna, but it also has USB and aux integration, Bluetooth streaming, and hands-free phone, plus wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, not to mention that backup camera I showed you earlier. The hole for the AC and heater controls has been physically moved further to the right. Beneath them are a set of plugs. The right side has USB-A and C ports to charge your phone. The left side has a USB-A and aux jack for connecting to the radio. Originally, this truck only had one speaker in the middle of the dash. I outfitted an entire system from Boss Audio that includes two 3.5-inch speakers in the dash, two 3.5-inch speakers custom mounted into the A-pillars, two 4x10-inch speakers in the rear corner closeout panels, an amp underneath the passenger seat, and a 10-inch powered subwoofer behind the seat. It now has a surround sound-like experience that's not overly powerful, but definitely nice for listening to classic tunes. There was really no other place to put them, but I had to install GPS sensors. one for the radio, one for the speedometer. They're at the base of the windshield in front of the instrument hood, so at least they're not seen from the inside. Interior switchgear is super basic. On the left side of the steering column you have knobs for lighting and windshield wipers. On the other side is your ignition switch. The vintage air, AC, and heat system was a huge upgrade for the interior. Technically it was for a C10, but most products carry over no problem. The only real difference we worked around was the long lower dash vent. It was shaped to accommodate a C10 dash, and since the GMC is different, we did some creative fiberglass and bodywork to create a one-off laser straight piece that looks as if it were made for the truck. It too got the same two-tone paint theme as the rest of the interior. The vintage air control panel is simple and straightforward. It operates electronically, so the fact that we actually physically moved the hole doesn't matter. The main unit mounts underneath the passenger side of the dash, and you route the vents accordingly. Aside from getting the compressor adapter bracket, everything was literally bolt in just like it would be on a C10. The glove box ended up being custom too. I thought the face of it looked a little plain, and since GM automatic transmission branding is Hydromatic, I found this emblem online and thought it was a perfect addition. The glove box liner, because of the vintage air equipment, had to be custom made. It's not perfect and it's shallow, but it still uses the factory light and has places to mount the base remote and OBD2 connector. It's enough space to store documents and phones. I put the little strap on to prevent things from falling out when opening. The glove box is lockable and is the only real storage the interior has aside from the modest amount of space behind and underneath the seat. The instrument cluster and housing we ordered from Classic Dash. Turned out the opening is a different shape from a C10 and not many people make a bezel for it. The full gauge sweep has all of the essentials and lights up a cool blue at night. The LED indicators in the middle are for the turn signals and high beams. The high beams are controlled with the classic dimmer switch in the floorboard. While these trucks had the option of dual visors, this one was fitted with just one from the factory, so we kept it that way. It's actually one of the very few original parts used in the build. I just refinished it and it works like a charm. I didn't get a rearview mirror with this truck, so I ended up using a chrome universal day-night mirror that's classy and functional. The turn dial beneath allows you to easily change the position of it. Well everyone, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you all enjoyed. Please don't forget to leave a like down below because it really helps the videos a lot. And if you haven't subscribed already, consider doing so and make sure you turn those notifications on. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.